Welcome to episode 105 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories their way and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50 and your host for today's show. After spending decades as a busy wife, mother, and columnist, Rita Lussier suddenly found herself in an unfamiliar space, surrounded by the quiet of an empty nest. In this episode, Rita shares how the departure of her youngest child, combined with the end of her long-running newspaper column, thrust her into a period of deep reflection and unexpected transformation. We'll explore how writing helped her navigate the emotional upheaval, how her relationships evolved, and how, eventually, she rediscovered herself as an author. If you've ever wondered what happens when the noise fades and life suddenly becomes your own again, Rita's story offers both comfort and clarity. Please welcome Rita Lussier to the show. Thank you for joining me today, Rita. I really appreciate your time. You have been...
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You've been living in Rhode Island for a long time. What brought you there, or were you there all your life?
I wasn't here all my life, but what brought me here began with my dad, who had been in the Navy and traveled all about and finally got stationed in Newport, Rhode Island when I was in first grade. And fortunately, he went to Cuba and Brooklyn and a couple other places by himself and left his family in Newport so that we could have a kind of normal childhood. So that was mine.
Okay. And what did you do before you turned 50?
I grew up in Middletown, Rhode Island, and I spent a lot of my teenage summers biking to my first job as waitress at Howard Johnson, and then down to the beach where I'd park my bike, run into the ocean, and wash all the grease from my hair, and then fall asleep on the warm sand. And when I wasn't serving fried clams, I loved to run and play tennis. But then I had to grow up.
Yes.
My first professional job were in marketing and advertising, and that's when I moved around a lot. I lived in Chicago, I lived in Boston, I lived in Connecticut, and that's where I met my husband. And eventually I started my own business, and so did my husband. And at some point, things got too crazy with the two kids, and I ended up closing my own business. And that's when I started writing. And I got a chance to write a column for the Providence Journal, which was just perfect for me and our family. And I was just a super, super busy person all through that time.
I could imagine. With having two kids, that would keep you busy enough. What kind of business did you own?
So it was just a transition from being in advertising and marketing. I ran my own marketing consulting business and took many of the clients that I used to have along with me, which was very nice. And I was so fortunate to be able to eventually run it out of the office in my home. So that was terrific. Everything was great about it, except I didn't have enough time for everything. Something had to give. And that was what I ended up giving.
Once the kids were out of the house, you decided to write about that experience, it looks like.
Yeah. So I definitely did, because like I said, I was so busy with my marriage, my two kids, and my newspaper column. I can't even remember turning 50. It was really the inciting incident, as they say, for me, was when our youngest daughter went off to college. And here I was alone. And at about the same time, my newspaper column ended. And so I was pretty rudderless and disoriented for quite some time. But the great part about being a writer, as you probably know, is that, I don't know if you do this, but I should say a lot of people do. That's the way I process things. So during those empty nest years, the early ones, I had a lot to process. So I did a lot of writing. I wrote about my feelings and all the empty space all around. I did write about my marriage because my husband and I really never spent much time alone. And all of a sudden, there we were alone together all the time. And it was awkward. I can vividly recall, like, the very first weekend after our daughter went to college, My husband picked me up at my Friday evening yoga class when we were done. And we drove around and he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you want to do?" And it was one of those totally awkward conversations. We ended up driving around Newport, Rhode Island in circles for a long time. And then eventually we ended up at one of our neighbors' restaurants and sat at the bar and ordered takeout. And then we went home. And fortunately, it got a lot better, but it was really awkward.
Right.
Well, I wrote about it.
That is a common problem for seasoned citizens, I think. Once the kids go out of the house, they've devoted their entire lives to them, shuttling them here and there and everywhere, and involved with concerts and organizations like scouting and church activities, things like that. And then the kids are gone. And many times, two people find out that they're basically strangers sharing a house. Do you find that as well?
Yeah, I think that other thing that is funny about our particular family is both of our kids are very talkative. And a lot of times, if we were all four of us in the car, if there was going to be any quarrel, it was about whose turn it was to talk. So my I did not get much of a chance. So that was another thing that we didn't have that buffer of all the other chatter that had been going on.
So you wrote this book, and Now Back to Me, which is about your entire life coming back to you. It's just you, right?
Yeah.
Or are you you're still married?
Yeah, I am definitely still married. We made it through and we're doing great. I just found during that time, just everything was changing. Like my parents, of course, were getting older and I started spending more time with them. They needed more help and I wrote about it. So some of my writing got published in newspapers and magazines. I ended up being on NPR, and that's when I began to focus on the dream I'd had for years to become an author. And I'm very proud to say it's finally coming true and Now Back to Me, Stories from an Empty Nest is going to be published on March 25th. So it's coming up quickly. And I'm very excited about it. So that's what happened and where I went with my after 50 time.
So what does Now Back to Me include? What kind of stories are you relaying to people?
So I like to say it's not a self-help book, but what I'm hoping it will be for many is an emotional guide for parents that are either in the empty nest or will soon be there or have been there and can remember all of the things they went through. But there's stories about the actual changing relationship with my children. There's stories about the changing relationship with my husband. There's definitely a lot of stories about my parents and all the changes that we went through together. Everything changed. My career, my friendship, and I just wrote about it. Even our dog. I wrote about the dog. I wrote about renovating our house. It's just a time for me at least, when all the things that I'd become accustomed to, all the rituals, all the schedule and the routine just blew up. I have found that from talking about it with people that a lot of what I encountered was pretty familiar to them. So I hope it resonates.
Exactly. A lot of people go through it, but nobody prepares them for it, really. In fact, in my situation, we looked forward to the empty nest. For years beforehand, my wife and I would count down to 678, June 7th of 2008, which was the day we knew my youngest daughter was going to graduate from high school. And all the stuff that we were going to be able to do when we were free of the parental responsibility. When that day came and she moved out of the house to go to college, it was devastating because so much of our lives had been tied around children that we did not really know each other. And unfortunately, my marriage didn't survive. So I'm glad to hear that yours did. What can people do to prepare for the empty nest?
That's a terrific question, of which I'm not sure I have the answer. Because the thing is, and I think that's why we're so unprepared, is most of us are so busy ahead of that. You've got your career, you've got your family, you're going, and you know it's coming. This is not one of those transitions that catch you, catches you by surprise. You've known since you had your youngest kid that this is gonna come, and yet you don't have time, I think, to adequately prepare in any which way.
That's right. A lot of parents, or the successful families that I've seen who have navigated this, have recognized that a big change is coming years earlier and started intentionally spending more time with one another.
That's so smart. I love that. That was weird on it, but
I know that's one of the things that we learn and we can share with others. That's why being seasoned citizen gives us great opportunity to share our unique experiences with others to help them through what we've already navigated.
absolutely. I agree with that.
So how long did it take you to write your book?
Okay. I would say overall, the whole thing from the idea to all the different advice I got along the way and all the different changes I made, and then getting a publisher, probably close to 10 years here.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was persistent, and it's something I really wanted. And every phase along the way, I think it got better. So that's all good.
Why did you opt to find a publisher instead of self-publishing?
Okay. So here's my story about that. My dad, who I was very close to, passed away when he was 96. And I don't know why. I just could not cry. It was very perplexing. As bad as I felt, I couldn't cry. And then I guess it was a few months later after he passed, I had planned to enter a writing contest, an essay contest. And it was the day before the deadline for the essay contest, and I had no idea what I was writing about, let alone had written a word. And my husband and I were sitting there, we were having a glass of wine. I think it was like a Sunday evening. And we were talking about it. And then it hit me exactly what I needed to write about. And it was just that about my father's passing and about the fact that I couldn't cry. And I ran upstairs to my office. It was dark in my office. I scribbled some stuff on a pad, and I thought either I have a good essay or I have nothing, but I'll look in the morning. And it ended up winning first place at the Irma Bombeck Writers Workshop. And then I went to Ohio. This is a long way around the story, but I went to Ohio to accept the award and also attend some workshops. And I was coming out of one workshop, and there was another one starting in the room next to it that I hadn't been scheduled to go into, but it was about memoir. And I thought, geez, I just finished the memoir. I might want to hop in and make sure I know what I'm doing. And the person facilitating the memoir was Brooke Warner. And she introduced herself and she said, I'm a publisher. So at the end of her workshop, I went up and introduced myself, told her I had just finished writing my own memoir. Would she take a look at it? And she did. And then she made an offer to publish it. And I'm so delighted because I've loved everything about the process of being published with She Writes Press. So that's a little magic that I think had a lot to do with my dad.
That's a cool story, how it all came about. I know that I've interviewed an enormous number of writers in Forward from 50. It just seems to be one thing that seasoned citizens can do to utilize their natural skills and their talents and their youth experiences and wisdom they've gained along the way and share it with other people. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's wonderful for processing things too. I think if you have to put things down into words, you're more aware of not only your surroundings, but your inner workings well. And I think it's very helpful for that too.
Did you have to take any training to learn to write book?
Yeah, I guess all the self-help stuff I could do, I got book story and structure, and I listened to podcasts, and editors, and people that gave me advice along the way. I would just open, but I think the best training probably began when I was like 5 or 6, which was I was an avid reader.
I agree. Yes, reading really helps.
So
What kind of books do you like?
I tend to like just nonfiction stuff. Maybe because I've been busy again, I find myself in another busy time of my life. I just am looking for things in nonfiction that I want to use for either inspiration or for practical advice. But when I have a lot of time on my hands, I would read just about anything, I think.
What other things are you doing besides writing?
I am a long-time runner. I've ran since I was in high school, and I'm still running, and I love that. And it does take up some time. And I love spending time with my friends. That's one of the blessings, I think, of the emptiness is that you do have time. It's not so limited, and you can do more things with more people more often. And I like that very much.
Have you had any challenges after you turned 50 that have really surprised you outside of the empty nest?
I think the biggest challenge was COVID, and I'm sure everybody that's listening has their own challenge that came along with that. But for me, it meant that our daughter that I talked about that moved away, who had been living on her own in New York City, ended up moving back in for what ended up being about 4 years. So that was challenging for her and for us. At the same time, my father had to be, he was still living on his own, but we had to visit him almost daily and keep him, he was a very social man, and we had to keep him from going out and exposing COVID, which was not easy. So we felt like between my sister and myself and my kid that we had to keep somebody over there pretty much a lot every day. That was a lot. Yeah.
So you were able to connect with your dad very well in the last couple of years of his life.
Yeah. It was a great time. Because like I said, he was very social and always going here and there, and he couldn't. And that gave him a chance to sit down, pay attention to the things in his life that he loved and think about them and reflect on them and talk about it. And it was a very nice time, I think, in that regard.
When you're talking about running, are you running races like marathons and things like that, or 5Ks?
You know what? I did run several marathons at early, well, in my 30s and 40s, but no longer do I use anything like that because I now find writing to be a different thing for me. It's more like a chance I run first thing in the morning before I can think of reasons not to. And it's like my quiet time. It's like a meditation, I would say, because I think about things, I come up with ideas, I come up with plans, or I work out a problem I'm facing. And it's just a wonderful time of day to have that. And I love it. And I'm going to keep going.
That it's certainly easier on the knees to do writing than it is to go running.
Yeah, I've been fortunate with that.
Hmm.
So I really have. So
If you could roll the clock back, is there anything you would do differently in your life?
no, I don't think so.
Not a
I'm in the no regret category like my dad. He always said that I'm going to live my life. I'm going to do it while I have the chance, and I'm not going to have any regrets. And I listened to that, and hopefully I can make it all the way feeling the same way.
Do you have any advice for people over 50 to help them either identify or pursue their passions?
Let me see. I think My advice would be to listen to their inner voice. Like deep inside, I think we all know what it is we'd like to do, but a lot of times we don't give ourselves permission to do it. And if you're not sure, I think if you finding things and you keep an open mind, you'll eventually find exactly what you need. And the other thing I definitely have to say this is that it's not too late. It's never too late. There's one of my cohort, as they call it, She Writes Press authors that's publishing, I think, next month too. She just celebrated her 90th birthday this month. And her book is going to be published in another week or two. And she's vibrant and smart and funny, and she's loving her life. And I think we can all do that.
Was she a writer before she started that?
I think she's a writer and a musician. So I think she might have written songs.
Okay.
I think this is a fantasy for young adults. So
that is amazing that a 90-year-old is writing a fantasy book for young adults.
Isn't it? I love it.
It is, absolutely.
Very grateful.
What's on your bucket list?
Oh, I would like to slow down a little bit whether I can think about my book. But I would like to travel. I've led a pretty simpler life in terms of travel compared to a lot of people, and there's a lot of parts of the world I haven't seen. So I think my husband, I will keep some of that.
Would you enjoy international travel, or did you want to stick in the United States?
There's a lot of nice places in the United States that I've never seen, but I would love to go to Europe too.
You said your book is coming out here in
March 25th? Yes, it is.
That's about the time when this will be released. How can people find it?
It should be in bookstores everywhere. If it's not, you can ask your bookstore to order it because it's distributed by Simon & Schuster, so it should be everywhere. But it's on Amazon as well. So I think you'll have problem finding it.
Super. People wanted to connect with you. How could they connect?
I have a website, and they can leave a message. It's ritalussier.com.
Okay. Are you active on social media?
I'm getting better at it with a lot of coaching from my son, but I do have social media up and running.
So we'll be sure to link to those in the show notes as well. But
yes,
I thank you for sharing your story, Rita. I'm glad that you are embracing the empty nest, because I think that's a problem that so many of us over the age of 50 have to come to terms with. And if there's resources out there to help people recover from that, or even better, prepare for it, it's just going to be a very valuable thing to have.
Yeah, I hope that some of what I've written inspire, resonate, help in some way, if at least to let people know that they're not alone, that the feelings that they might be having are shared by many people.
That's a very good point. You are not alone, and those feelings are natural, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's a major life change for you as much as it is for the kids. Thank you again for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure.
That was a meaningful conversation with Rita Lussier, whose book, Now Back to Me, Stories from an Empty Nest, offers a heartfelt glimpse into one of life's most overlooked transitions. As Rita described, the experience of becoming an empty nester was not something she could fully prepare for, despite knowing for years that it was coming. Like many parents, she found herself suddenly surrounded by silence, grappling with shifting roles, and asking herself, what now? But rather than rush to fill in the void, Rita chose to lean into it, using writing as a tool for reflection, healing, and ultimately renewal. From processing the changes in her marriage and caring for aging parents to rediscovering old passions and setting new goals, Rita's post-50 journey has been anything but stagnant. Her willingness to share the awkward, emotional, and even humorous moments of this season reminds us that there's power in vulnerability as well as purpose in reinvention. What stands out most in Rita's message is that it's never too late to pursue a dream, pick up a creative passion, or simply give yourself permission to slow down and think about what truly matters. In fact, you don't have to have it all figured out. Sometimes all it requires is to be quiet enough to listen to that inner voice. If you're approaching or already in the empty nest years, I highly recommend checking out Rita's book, Now Back to Me, Stories from an Empty Nest. You can find it in bookstores and at Amazon. To connect with Rita, visit her website at www.ritalussier.com or look for her on Facebook and Instagram. That's all for this week's show. If you'd like to start living a more meaningful life, I encourage you to download our free guide to finding purpose, which is available at www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you like this show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.